welcome to the Absolute Recap Biology Edition. I'm your host, Melanie Kingett, and I'll be your guide to scoring a 5. Here at the Absolute Recap, we aim to maximize your understanding and minimize your need for memorization. Each episode will review content, skills, and test-taking tips to help you succeed in May. Your recap starts now. Hi, and welcome to the Absolute Recap Biology Edition. Today's episode will recap the 4 big ideas and 6 science practices that the AP exam covers. It's important for students to know this information because often it can get really foggy in all of the details. The 4 big ideas in this course and on the exam are evolution, energetics, information storage and transmission, and systems interactions. Why do I need to know this, and how does this connect to other things? These big ideas will appear in the multiple choice and FRQ sections, but in a very predictable way. For example, evolution is a common thread when discussing Unit 2, cell structure and function, Unit 5, heredity, as well as 7 and 8, natural selection and ecology. Energetics appear in nearly every unit, except for 5, 6, and 7. This information is useful for students because as you learn more information, you can start to link bigger ideas together. The final unit that is covered, ecology, encompasses all 4 of the big ideas, and it is the only unit to do so. Let's zoom in. Big idea number 1 is evolution, or EVO as it's abbreviated on the course exam description. The process of evolution drives the diversity and unity of life. This can be seen through genetic makeup, as well as competition for resources. When we're considering the way in which all living things are connected, and why multiple organisms have the same nucleic acid sequence, for example, evolution will be the common thread. Big idea number 2 is energetics, or ENE on the course exam description. Biological systems use energy and molecular building blocks to grow, reproduce, and maintain dynamic homeostasis. Homeostasis, that's one of those buzzwords we hear a lot, and unfortunately, it's often misdefined. Remember that organisms want to stay in their Goldilocks zone, but things are always changing. So, just as you need to keep the temperature in your house to feel comfortable, all organisms like to keep the right pH, water balance, sugar levels, and this will come back in many areas of study during this course. Buzzwords that you're going to hear in the energetic section include metabolism, cellular respiration, and photosynthesis, just to name a few. Big idea number 3 is information storage and transmission. This is abbreviated as IST on the course exam description. Living things store, retrieve, transmit, and respond to information essential to life's processes. If they didn't, they wouldn't be living. Our definition of life ensures that this information must be passed on. DNA is heritable. It's important for the continuation of a species that this information can be passed on as well as change over time. Big idea number 4 is systems and interactions, or SYI. Biological systems interact, and these systems and their interactions exhibit complex properties. This seems very obvious, doesn't it? And also a little vague. Obviously, every cause can have an effect. The reason why this is a big idea on the exam is as a student, you need to be able to predict and analyze these interactions. One of the most common themes that will come up with big idea number 4 are structure and function. All molecules and organisms that have unique structures will have unique functions, and therefore we can expect their interactions to also reflect these structures and functions. To recap, there are 4 big ideas on the AP exam: evolution, energetics, information storage and transmission, and systems interactions. All 4 of these big ideas tell the entire story of biology. Students need to have certain scientific skills to be successful on the AP exam. These skills are known on the CED as science practices. They include concept explanation, visual representations, questions and methods, representing and describing data, statistical tests and data analysis, and lastly, argumentation. Of these science practices, the most heavily weighted are commonly concept explanation and argumentation. Let's zoom in. Science practice 1. You need to explain biological concepts, processes, and models in written format. So what does this actually look like, and what do they need you to do? This is the skill that you're probably most comfortable with, that which you can memorize. You've been using index cards and making vocab lists and practice questions for a while, and some of that will help you be successful on the AP exam. But misconceptions can happen, and if you're not thinking about why the answers are the answers, you're missing a piece of the puzzle. Here at the Absolute Recap, remember, we focus to maximize the understanding. We want to minimize the memorization. So although you may be comfortable explaining information and concepts, challenge yourself to do it in an unexpected way. Perhaps instead of listing a process in step form, draw a picture, label the parts, and then explain it to a friend. Science practice 2 is to analyze visual representations of biological concepts and processes. I know this is a podcast, but a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you will be expected to analyze, describe, and at times draw your own pictures to explain and describe biological processes and concepts. How can you practice this skill? It's important to review mathematical models, diagrams, and flowcharts that already exist, but also to draw your own. Remember, not all diagrams are created equal, and 3D space and orientation are important. There is no up, down, and left and right when talking about processes in science. Science practice 3 is to determine scientific questions and methods. This is going to be that in which you need to evaluate and at times pose your own scientific questions. A firm understanding of null and alternative hypothesis strategies, as well as their future relationships to statistics, is crucial. How can you practice this skill? Well, debate. You need to argue your position. You need to say why this particular answer on a scientific experiment is not only valid, but the reasoning is sound. It's important to check your misconceptions and ensure that your questions and strategies are in line with scientific thought. Science practice 4 is to represent and describe data. This is probably a skill you're comfortable with. You've been graphing, making tables, writing down data for quite some time. But have you always done it correctly? Have you created some shortcuts? Did that data table always have a title? Do you include units with all of your answers? Can you graph with the appropriate type of graph for your data? All of these are important skills to practice. Remember, what you do in the lab, whether virtual or in the classroom, directly correlates to the AP exam as well. It's important to ensure that you understand the numbers, how the numbers come together to tell a story, and how that story relates back to one of our 4 big ideas. How can you practice this skill? Well, you need to graph by hand. And why do you need to graph by hand? Because this exam will be on paper. There will not be a shortcut to type into Excel. I encourage you, even if you are submitting lab reports for your course digitally, do a quick sketch by hand first. Science practice 5 is to perform statistical tests and mathematical calculations to analyze and interpret data. Remember, you could bring a calculator with you on the day of the test. There are several mathematical calculations that you need to be comfortable performing, but thankfully, you don't have to memorize equations. The AP mathematics sheet will be included on the day of the test. How do you practice this skill? Trial and error. Well, in fact, error is one of the things you're going to have to do on the exam. Standard error bars, plus or minus 2 standard error of the means, all discussed on a future episode. Don't forget chi-squared hypothesis testing, as well as rejecting or failing to reject the null hypothesis, is all part of this skill. The final science practice is to develop and justify scientific arguments using evidence. It's no secret that students like to argue. Many of their teachers have heard them try to get that extra point. So it should be a blessing that this is one of the skills that is heavily represented on the AP exam. Constructing an argument in an appropriate way that uses evidence and scientific reasoning is something you should be doing on a regular basis. On a future episode, we will discuss how CER, or claim evidence reasoning, is the concise and consistent way to practice this skill. To recap, there are 6 science skills on the AP exam. These skills will be found in both the multiple choice and the free response question section. It is your responsibility as a student to shape your studying in a way that will allow you to practice these skills during the learning process. Today's question of the day is about the free response section of the exam. In the free response section, which science skill is most commonly represented? For the answer to today's and future questions, please follow us on Instagram at TheApsoluteRecAP. That's the APsolute recap. If you are a student with questions or a teacher with suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. If you have a biology topic or another AP subject you would like us to cover on the Absolute Recap, please email us at TheApsoluteRecap@gmail.com. That's the APsolute recap@gmail.com. The Absolute Recap is produced by Brad Kingett with music by Zach Caruso. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Time's up, pencils down. Thank you for listening to the Absolute Recap Biology Edition. AP is a registered trademark of the College Board and is not affiliated with the Absolute Recap. Copyright 2020, Absolute Recap, LLC. All rights reserved.